Okay, ready for a deep dive into a true classic.
Always up for a good book.
Today, it's all about The Catcher in the Rye by J.B. Salinger.
Oh, interesting choice. I'm curious, where are we starting our deep dive?
We'll be looking at excerpts from Wikipedia. I think it'll be really interesting to uncover the how and why behind this book.
Sounds good to me. How did this book come to be, and why is it still relevant, and why is Holden Caulfield such a memorable character?
Exactly. Those are the big questions. And what's fascinating is that The Catcher in the Rye didn't just appear out of nowhere. Salinger had been developing these ideas, this character, for years before the novel was even published.
Oh, really? So it's like he had these pieces floating around.
Yeah, and he wove them together over time. In fact, he even introduced aspects of the story, even Holden himself, in some of his early short stories.
Wow, that's really interesting. So, we get glimpses of what would become Catcher before the actual book, sort of like those early demos that bands release before their big album drops.
Exactly. It's like finding those early recordings your favorite band made before they were famous. You hear those initial sparks of what would become their greatest hits.
I love that analogy. Do you remember which short story featured Holden? I'm curious to see those early versions of him.
There was one called Sleigh Rebellion off Madison. It was published back in 1946, so it gave readers this early glimpse of Holden Caulfield. You can tell Salinger was drawn to this character, to the themes he represented, even back then.
He was already refining his vision, finding his voice. I love that we get to trace those creative threads back to their origin.
It's like getting a behind-the-scenes look at the making of a masterpiece. You see how Salinger carefully developed his ideas, how he wove together elements and characters from his earlier works, until they coalesced into the iconic novel we know today.
And speaking of Holden, it's his voice, right, that really makes this novel. Salinger nailed the voice of a teenage boy.
Totally. We're right there with Holden, experiencing the world through his eyes, and it's raw, unfiltered, no punches pulled.
And you really get a sense of his struggles, his angst, that confusion, and that almost cynical view of the world that, unfortunately, I think a lot of teenagers can relate to, right?
Absolutely, especially as he's bouncing from the structured world of prep school to the chaotic streets of New York City. And then there's the grief he carries with him, the loss of his younger brother, Allie.
And that grief, it's like a constant weight on him. It colors how he sees everyone, leads him to label anything that doesn't meet his internal bar for authenticity as phony.
It's like he's constantly looking for something real, something genuine, in a world that often feels fake or superficial to him. And I think that's a big part of what makes his character so complex and fascinating.
It really makes you wonder, is Holden's rebellion his need to call out the phonies? Is it just a phase, typical teenage angst, or is it something deeper?
Right. Like, is he actually critiquing the hypocrisy and shallowness he sees in the adult world? Is he just being a typical angsty teen, or is there more to it? It's an interesting question, for sure.
It really is. What are your thoughts? I feel like there's no easy answer.
I'm not sure there's a simple answer. I think it's more nuanced than just calling Holden a rebel without a cause. He's flawed, yeah, he can be judgmental, even a bit frustrating at times. But there's also a vulnerability to Holden, a deep yearning for connection that I find relatable.
That's the thing about Salinger's writing. He doesn't give you easy answers, doesn't create these black and white characters. He gives us Holden's complexities, his flaws and his sensitivities, and then lets us, the readers, sit with the contradictions. And that's what makes his voice so compelling to read, right? It's raw, it's honest, and that really resonates with people even after all these years. I mean, that search for something real, something genuine, it's something we can all connect with.
Definitely. And this really comes out in Holden's relationship with his younger sister, Phoebe, right?
Oh, absolutely. She's like this breath of fresh air for him, this symbol of innocence, of real, genuine emotion that he feels is missing in so much of the adult world.
You can just feel that shift in him when they're together.
Right. Yeah, it's like a different side of him comes out. He's not just cynical and jaded. There's this vulnerability, this protectiveness that shines through.
Their scenes together are some of the most powerful in the book. You see how deeply he cares for her, how much he wants to shield her from all the crap, all the disappointments that he's already encountered.
And that's where we see that iconic image from the novel come into play. The whole Catcher in the Rye idea.
Right. For anyone who hasn't read in a while, or maybe needs a quick refresher, can you remind us about that?
Of course. So Holden, he has this dream where he's catching children before they fall off a cliff. And for him, it's this metaphor, right? It's about saving kids from losing their innocence, from falling into the, disillusionment of adulthood.
He wants to be the one to save them from all that.
Exactly. To be that protector, shielding them from the phoniness and hypocrisy that he sees everywhere in the adult world, which honestly is kind of a beautiful thought, even if it's a bit misguided.
It is, like he wants to freeze time, keep everyone in this state of childhood purity forever.
Exactly. For effort, right? But then, of course, there's Phoebe. She's wise beyond her years, and she calls him out on this whole idea that you can protect people from reality forever.
It's a really important moment in the book. Holden's forced to confront the limits of his own idealism. He can't be the catcher in the rye for everyone.
No, he can't. He can't shield everyone from the inevitable fall into adulthood, and that's kind of the heart of the story, isn't it? That realization.
It is, and it makes it relatable because, let's be honest, growing up has its downsides, right?
Mm.
We all face those moments of disillusionment, those letdowns.
It's unavoidable, really. But The Catcher in the Rye, it acknowledges that bittersweet reality of growing up, of confronting those disappointments, but it also suggests that there's still beauty to be found in that journey, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. It's a reminder that maturing, becoming an adult doesn't mean you have to lose sight of what's important to you, that you can hold on to your values even if you feel like the world around you has lost its way.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the reasons why this book has resonated with so many readers over the years, across generations. It captures that very human experience of feeling alienated, that desire to find your place, to find meaning and connection in a world that often feels indifferent.
It's interesting because for a book that sparked and continues to spark so much conversation, Salinger himself was notoriously private.
Oh, totally. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? I mean, this book became a phenomenon, but the author wanted nothing to do with the spotlight.
He really did. After Catcher was published, he basically retreated from public life, refused interviews. He let his work speak for itself, which is kind of admirable.
It is. Like he was saying, this is it. This is my statement to the world, and that's enough. And it makes you wonder what else he might have written, right? I mean, there are rumors of all these unpublished manuscripts just sitting in a safe somewhere.
Can you imagine? All those stories, those insights into Salinger's mind, just waiting to be discovered.
Right. It's kind of mind-blowing. And again, it speaks to his character. This wasn't about fame or fortune for him. It was about the work itself, the craft of writing. He was a true artist in that sense.
Absolutely. He achieved a level of literary success that most authors only dream of, and yet he seemed to find the most meaning in the solitary act of creation.
It makes you think about artistic legacy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What it means to create something that endures, that continues to resonate with people long after you're gone. And in that sense, Salinger definitely achieved something truly remarkable.
Definitely. The Catcher in the Rye, it continues to provoke, to challenge, to start conversations all these years later. It's a testament to the power of storytelling, to being authentic and true to your voice, even when it feels risky or unconventional.
Absolutely. And you know, speaking of sparking conversations, we can't talk about this book without acknowledging the elephant in the room, right? The controversy.
It's true. This book has been banned, challenged, it's been linked to real-life tragedies. It's a complex and sensitive topic, and it's definitely something we need to address.
It is. And I think it's important to approach this part of the conversation with nuance, with care, because it's easy to jump to conclusions or make generalizations.
Yeah.
Like, it's true that the language in the book was considered edgy, especially for the time. And yeah, there have been situations where people who have committed terrible acts have also had some connection to this book.
But it's so important to remember that correlation doesn't equal causation. Millions of people have read The Catcher in the Rye and not felt compelled to commit any acts of violence.
Exactly. To blame a book for those tragedies, it's not only simplistic, but also ignores all the other factors involved, the complexities of human behavior.
Right, and it's important to remember that literature, like all art, can evoke strong emotions, right? It can push us to think differently, to question our beliefs, and that can be uncomfortable. It can definitely make us face hard truths about ourselves and society.
Totally. It's like holding up a mirror to our own flaws, our own anxieties, and sometimes we don't always like what we see.
It can be tough to grapple with those uncomfortable truths, but I think it's important that we do. Instead of shying away from these difficult topics, maybe we should be asking why this book, in particular, has been at the center of so much controversy for all these years.
Right. Like it struck a nerve somehow and it continues to resonate, even if it's in a controversial way. And it's not just about the language, right? It goes deeper than that.
Exactly. It's about the emotions Salinger taps into, that raw, unsettling feeling. He captures something many of us probably recognize in ourselves. It forces us to confront those vulnerabilities and anxieties we might rather avoid.
It's like he's holding up a mirror to society and saying, here, take a look, this is us. And sometimes those reflections can be pretty uncomfortable. It challenges us to look past the surface, past those easy answers.
And to really examine our own assumptions about identity, about belonging, about human nature in general. It's a lot to unpack, and maybe that's why it's still relevant today.
I think so. It's a book that stays with you. It makes you think, it makes you feel, and sometimes it makes you squirm a little bit, but in a good way.
Total. It
That
sparks that conversation, that deeper dives into ourselves and the world around us. And I think that's a powerful thing. Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into The Catcher in the Rye. We've covered a lot of ground, from Salinger's early work to the controversy surrounding the book and its enduring legacy.
It's been quite a journey, and we've explored some really thought-provoking themes along the way. But before we go, we want to leave you with something to ponder. We've talked about Holden's desire to be the catcher in the rye, protecting children from the harsh realities of adulthood. But if you could ask Holden one question today, what would it be? What would you say to him if you had the chance?
It's a great question and one we'd love to hear your thoughts on. Find us on social media and share your questions for Holden Caulfield. Until next time, happy reading.